Not me looking for the mic. Hello, everyone. Hi. Are y'all enjoying yourselves? Okay, period. Because look, the Hoopa app is popping. Y'all been on that, right? Oh, y'all been on it? Awesome. So, let me get over here to the podium. We are so excited. I also want to know, how did the caucus go? Oops. It went well? Y'all made history. Y'all know that, right? It's amazing. It's amazing. So before we get started with this incredible plenary, I'd like to shout out our partners who make our work possible. And some of y'all are here today, so when I call your name, make sure you make some noise for them, all that jazz, okay? So much love, and shout out to our Okra Collaborative partners. For y'all who may not be aware, the Okra Collaborative is a transnational partnership with other Black and Afro-feminist organizations throughout the diaspora. We thank the following organizations committed to organizing despite the borders that seek to keep us separated. So y'all make some noise. Hakina Mama Wa Africa. Yeah, woo, yeah, make some noise. Rena Health Senegal. Make some noise. Neas Mawon. Y'all like my French? Y'all like my French? Queso. Sex and Gender Justice. Yes. Rede de Mujeres Negras do Paraná. Yes. Colectivo Mujeres de Asfalto. Yes. And Mwasi Collective and Swatchy Collective. Awesome, awesome. We also want to give out a shout out to our partners in this Black feminist movement who have gone deep with us over the past few years. M for BL, y'all know who that is? Y'all know who that is? I thought so. Girls for Gender Equity. We Testify. The Afia Center. Black Women Radicals. And other Black RJ-led organizations. We love y'all. Shout out. Alrighty, so before our plenary starts, I just want to invite our plenary speakers to take the stage. And I also want to give the warmest of welcomes to our moderator, Lutse Segu. Let me tell y'all a little bit about Lucy as she's coming to the stage. Lutse Segu is a first-generation Haitian-American queer Black feminist thinker and a proud citizen of Miami. Lutse is a digital Black feminist known on these internet streets as the social justice doula, who does feminist consciousness-raising work online. She is an anti-racist educator, a creative intellectual, an emerging interdisciplinary scholar. Lutse is currently a doctoral candidate at the University of British Columbia. Yes. And she is studying gender, race, sexuality, and social justice. She is currently writing her dissertation, where one of the themes she is exploring is Black feminism being her civic spiritual practice. Let's give it up for Lutse, y'all.
Hello? Okay. Before we get started, how are y'all feeling? I really want to take this time before I get started to just give so much love, affirmation to our amazing Executive Director, Paris Hatcher. You know, as someone who is positively obsessed with Black feminism and who takes seriously that Black feminism is the truth, the light, and the way, and the only way that we're going to fight back against species suicide and all of this stuff, the fact that we have been here living inside of the imagination of Paris is just amazing. So I want us to not take for granted that we are in this beautiful space that was imagined for us. As we had all these conversations around imagination, to me, after this experience, I always want to live inside of a queer Black feminist imagination. So yeah, wanted to give that up. All right, okay, we are here. We gonna have the conversations. I am so happy. I love the internet, and I have, in my various ways, been looking at these people in various ways on the internet. So we're gonna have the conversation. We are going to start off by reading some of these bios. We have TK Sako. Is an anti-colonialism advocate, content creator, writer, and speaker. In 2020, when she was 20 years old, she founded The Darkest Hue, a digital platform that centers the experiences and perspectives of dark-skinned Black girls, women, and femmes. She creates thought-provoking content and facilitates difficult conversations around colorism, misogynoir, Black feminism, and other related topics. Her work has been highlighted in Essence Magazine, Ebony Magazine, Harvard Business Review, The Today Show, and most recently, Vice Media. Last year, she completed her undergraduate education at Columbia University, where she studied psychology and public health. Since graduating, she has worked with youth with criminal justice involvement. All right, now, the beautiful Amara Jones. We have Amara, whose work has won Emmy and Peabody Awards, is the creator of Translash Media, a cross-platform nonprofit journalism and narrative organization which produces content to shift the current culture of hostility towards transgender people in the U.S. She was named by Time Magazine as one of the 100 most influential people in 2023. All right, position. All right, born and raised Oklahoma community organizer Maury got their start community organizing on a larger scale in high school student government. Even though they recognize the importance of using their voice every day, that importance grows. So this is Representative Maury Turner. Monica Ray Simpson is a queer North Carolina native, has organized extensively against human rights abuse, the prison industry, racism, systemic violence against Southern Black women and LGBTQ people. A proud graduate of the historically Black Johnson C. Smith University, she earned a bachelor's in communications and organized for LGBTQ rights on and off campus. She then became the operations director and first person of color at the Charlotte Lesbian and Gay Community Center. Next, she trained Black youth in activism, philanthropy, and fundraising as the Ujamaa coordinator of grassroots leadership. In 2010, she moved to GA, to Georgia, to be our development coordinator. She was promoted to deputy coordinator in 2011, interim executive director in 2012, and executive director in 2013 of Sister Song. All right, so let's get to these questions. Yes, you were on the Time 100 list with that epic dress that needed its own person to carry the train, yes. Question. This is for all the panelists. All right. What is a piece of pop culture living rent-free in your head? It can be a show, an online conversation you are engrossed in, pop culture, gossip, or anything in the zeitgeist. For me, it's Queer Ultimatum. I'm waiting to get home to watch the last 2 episodes. but I'm gonna leave it there. All right. Representative Maury Turner, what is a pop culture thing that's living rent free in your head right now?
Man, as much as I hate to admit it, Timothy Chalamet and Kylie Jenner dating in my head, rent free. I don't know how it happened, but.
Ooh, okay. That's an old internet gossip thing. Okay, all right.
Mic check. Word. So I am an avid debater in the comment section, mostly on Shade Room. And it's quite entertaining. Last week, me and Young Jock from Atlanta got into a complete argument in his DMs over one of his recent posts. And so we might be on the internet talking to each other about it sooner or later. But that is my guilty pleasure. I love to go in on people in the comments.
Okay. Amara.
Okay, so I'm gonna give two.
Okay.
So one retro and one current. The retro one, because I've been doing a deep dive into all things Tina Turner. I don't know who else who can relate. For me, the thing that lives rent-free in my head is her up on that crane walkway about 9 stories in, that's her, agreeing. About 9 stories in the air, walking over a crowd of 100,000 Germans, getting them to sing along Nutbush city limits. And I just think about how powerful it is for a black woman in her 60s to be able to command that type of power and crowd, and to have people be singing along with her, validating her experience, outhouse, church house. The second thing that I think about, which is much more banal, is Love in Paradise. It's the 90-Day Fiancé, but just in paradise. Excuse me. And I'm obsessed with the 2 gay men on it who both say that they're tops. And that's what they say. And then the one who says that he's 29, but doesn't look it. His name is Carlos. That's Carlos. Look him up and you tell me if you think he's 29.
Awesome. TK.
Yeah, so I am absolutely obsessed with reality TV. Before I got into this new show I will speak about in a few seconds, I was obsessed with Real Housewives of Potomac. Yes, let's give it up. It just has just the drama, the theatrics, everything I could ask for. But right now I'm obsessed with Young, Famous, and African. It's on Netflix. Woo! I just binge watched season 2, and it's just ridiculous. Like the most ridiculous group of African people you can put in a room together. It's really beautiful to watch. So, yeah.
Okay. All right. This second question, once again, is for all the panelists. We hear many references to the culture wars. From where you sit, is there a culture war, or are we just a hyper-polarized democracy? If there is a culture war, where are the fault lines, and what is the strategy needed to win the culture war, and what does it mean to win it? Representative Maury Turner.
I did not think I was going to have to start this one. I think we're living in a time where it feels like oftentimes folks will throw around terms like, or phrases like culture war or being woke, right, and turn it into a pejorative or like as a way to hide what's really happening, right? A cultural awakening, a cultural shift in America. And I think being in these rooms specifically over the past couple of days, like have really, for me, helped redefine. I think one of the big things that we've been hearing about is how we really redefine what our wins are, right? When we decolonize them, right? When we take them out of whatever policy wins folks are looking at, right? And we see that we are truly winning in our everyday lives, right? To be free and for equitable liberation. And so like, for me, I think like the culture war is that folks in the global minority, right, are just not ready and willing to see the power that we possess, right, and are having a hard time reckoning with what happens if the folks who have been systemically oppressed actually get the power that they have, right? And so for me, I think like that's what the culture war is, right? And I think being in rooms like this, but also taking the knowledge that we are getting from rooms like this and moving them well beyond this hotel, when we go back to our own states and things like that, right? All the knowledge that we learn, right? That's how we continue to further power building, equitable liberation, right? Justice. And for me, that spans across like the mutual aid that we are doing in communities to get free and stay free, and also the policy wins that we can make because of that. Like, as a politician, I would be a fool to say, like, to ask you to continue to show up at the ballot box, but also not say, and what is the community organizing that we are doing beyond that? And so I think like the culture war, and then also how we continue to push through that and create something even more beautiful than what we have now.
So this question really made me grapple for a minute, right? Because I do think that we are a super polarized society. And I do think that this culture war conversation, the way that it's framed, for me it's a little interesting. So I think that, I think about this in two ways. I think that there is a culture war going on, in particular because I like to engage in the comments. I'm seeing this in a different kind of way. I'm seeing that people are grappling with their multi-identitied self, and they don't quite know how to then operationalize that in a way that makes sense for them. And so people are grappling with that, right? So I think that's one way that I'm seeing this culture war phenomenon like show up. It's like even within our own culture, like we are grappling like all these different identities that we hold, and then that's showing up right in the broader culture that's then making things complicated. And then I also think the other thing that I've been seeing that's been really interesting is that I feel like I sit in a very privileged place of being able to be in very progressive, very thought-provoking, like really beautiful spaces like this, right? Where we're able to like grapple with things, meet like-minded people. And I don't think that that's what everybody gets access to, right? And so I think that there's something there, but I actually think is an opportunity for us to think about the ways in which we are disseminating information to help correct and to like move the conversations differently in communities. So that's coming up for me in this conversation when I think about culture wars. And then there's like the broader culture that we're fighting against, right? That's trying to take us out, and then figuring out the ways that we actually combat that. So I wanted to just add that into the conversation today, but I think that this culture war that is internal, to our community and internal to us is an opportunity for us to do some really deep work and organizing around that really excites me when I think about the opportunity of culture shift as a strategy and how we do our work. And so, yeah, I'll pause there because there's two other brilliant people too.
So I think for me, what is really important about this question and conversation is that I will never, unprovoked, let the words culture war leave my lips. And the reason why I don't let that phrase leave my lips is because the way that we talk about it is that it is made to be seen as ancillary, as marginal to whatever people think is serious. And the reason why I don't use that word is because I will constantly say and believe that the culture war is not a culture war, it is the war. That if you shift culture, you shift the way that people think and you shift the way that people act. And that's one of the things that the Christian nationalist movement has actually figured out. And a really good example is the person at the end of this particular panel, Maureen Turner, who, and one of the things that I study and that I've done a lot of work on, and that one of the two podcasts that I host focuses on an investigative series podcast called The Anti-Trans Hate Machine, A Plot Against Equality, which focuses on the way that the Christian nationalist movement has worked for the past 10 years through a coordinated, interlocking set of organizations and billionaires and politicians and nonprofit organizations and an entire media infrastructure that they have built, which is actually the most powerful media infrastructure in the country, to actually bring us to the point of the conversation that we're currently having about trans rights. And that there's nothing accidental about where we are. It's all been a part of a very dedicated and focused plan since around 2013. And one of the things that we have to understand, of course, is the intersection between race and gender in the conversation about trans rights. You know, actually a really motivating factor for them, which maybe we can get into later, is the way in which the perceived threat of white womanhood through Black trans people has helped to animate this conversation. And have a whole nother thing about that. And so the reason why I say that the culture war is not a culture war, but it is the war, is that if you change the way that people think, if you change the conversation, that conversation will be weaponized. So we've been in a very intense conversation, specifically since around 2019, building every year around the role of trans people in society. And this year, one of the ways that that was operationalized for the very first time was through the censure of Mauree Turner by their colleagues in the Oklahoma State Legislature. And one of the key things about their censure is that it was a road test for all of the other censures. So the censure of the two Justins, the censure of then Zoe Zephyr, who is another white trans woman in Montana, all came after that. And so you can see the link between the cultural conversation and then how that can then manifest to actual action, to political action, to silencing elected political leaders. And that's why I think that we have to revolutionize the way that we think about culture and the way that we think about culture in the movement of our society, because the Christian nationalist movement a long time ago figured out that the war, that culture is the war.
So I think before embarking on my digital feminism journey, I thought of culture wars as something that occurred between groups, so it was an intergroup issue and not so much of an intra-group issue. But when I started advocating against colorism online, I quickly understood that there's a culture war and several culture wars. There's a war happening within the Black community on dark-skinned people, on queer people, on trans people, on disabled people. And so I've become really interested in the Black manosphere, and if you're not familiar with that, it's a subset of Black men on the internet who are have this weird fascination with belittling Black women, and they just don't hate Black women, they hate other types of Black people that are not cis-het men. So it's really interesting to see how they've adopted very anti-Black politics we'd expect conservatives to have, and they are being radicalized online, and they are consuming that type of hatred and vitriol on a loop, and they are producing that same content and that same type of hatred. So I definitely see a culture war there, because what we do online definitely does translate offline. That is why I'm so invested in carving out online spaces that are inclusive, that do challenge the surface level conversations we have about anti-Blackness sometimes, where we think harm is only something white people can do to us and not something we can do to ourselves, to each other, to other Black people. So I think there is definitely a culture war in terms of there is a subset of Black people we privilege and all Black people privilege. We are all dealing with so many internalized biases. So we really need to interrogate our biases and challenge other Black people to interrogate their biases, because we love to focus on what white people are doing and how the white man is the devil and this, that, and the third. And we forget, or we ignore, or we don't want to confront the fact that sometimes we behave very devilish towards each other. And ignoring it is not going to make those problems go away. No one's going to heal through being ignored. No one's going to heal through suppressing whatever harm they're taking on by other Black people. So when I think of culture wars now, I think less of like conservatives versus liberals or Black people versus white people. I think about the work we can do within our communities, within ourselves, within our families, within our schools. And when we do that work and we're more on the same page, I think then we can, or we will be better equipped to take on the culture wars that are intergroup.
Thank you. Representative Maury Turner, part of your bio on your campaign website reads that you are a queer, non-binary, Oki Muslim, and you are also the first non-binary and Muslim to be elected to the state level. How are you navigating these? Yes. Let's affirm that. How are you navigating these intersections, and how does it feel to occupy so many firsts?
Thank you. Yeah, I am deeply introverted, and there is nothing I hate more than talking about myself. So yes, I ran for office for the first time in 2020. I knew then, running for office, that I would be the first Muslim elected in the state of Oklahoma to the state legislature, but it wasn't until after we won the primary and the general election and those articles started coming out that I realized that I was the first non-binary person elected to a state level position in U.S. history. Thank you. I think ultimately, long story short, it's been a really humbling experience that has provided me with so many great opportunities, but it has also been a deeply isolating experience too. We get to come out in several different ways. I remember the first time I ever came out to my friends about being Muslim, right? Like, dad Muslim, mom Baptist, born and raised with principles from both. I think the first time I came out to a friend about being Muslim, we were sitting having sushi, and I told him, and he looked at me across the table. This is before I ever wore hijab. I dressed modestly because I'm a trans kid from Oklahoma that just like never felt comfortable in my body. But we're sitting across the table, and I tell him, I'm like, hey, I actually want to let you know that I'm Muslim. And he said, oh, you're one of those towel heads? And we haven't spoken since. But the thing about, and then I went on, I did a lot of soul searching and being okay with myself. And in college, I started to intern for and work with a lot of organizations that harness different parts of my identity, so I could, because I love volunteering, I love community organizing, like that's very cathartic for me. And so when I got elected in 2020, I didn't get an opportunity to come out to my Muslim community first. Like, there are a couple of people that I was ready to have that conversation with who are still great friends that I love, but I lost an entire community. And in various ways, right, there are things that we go through, right, like between the censure, like every other week I get in trouble for dress code, and I don't break the dress code. They just are always looking for something, looking for another way to silence Black people, silence trans folks, silence Muslims, right? Folks who continuously are showing up to the state legislature for the first time in a long time, because representation really does matter. And not just representation, but good representation folks need to understand that there is somebody who understands them, right, who is thinking about them when we are making those policy decisions that dictate our everyday lives. And I think, like, the thing about our election, and I do say our because House District 88 not only asked me to run for office, but they also wrote the playbook and then followed it through. Like, we unseated I ran to the left of a Democrat, and we unseated a 6-year Democratic incumbent in our very first election. I am a workaholic. In college, I studied animal science, political science, and sociology. And the one thing I remember from political science in college is that your first or second election is about name recognition, and your second to third is like when you'll win it, if you're gonna win it. But yet again, right, like, growing up with a mother and a grandmother and a community that was based in community care, right? Before I even understood what community organizing was, right? Had those words. Like, we were community organizing and taking care of each other. My mom worked 3 jobs. She worked for the state during the day. She worked at a Dollar General warehouse overnight, and on the weekend she worked at Sally's Beauty Supply. And when she had free time, she was teaching Sunday school, and we were right there with her. And it was always, we were either the house or we were going to another parent's house, right? We were latchkey kids. We were all just mobbing around town. And so if she wasn't home, we were at the public library doing all these things. But ultimately what I'm saying is that, like, in order for me to get to where I am, like the community organizing and also like understanding and internalizing and being okay with every part of my identity and everybody that I came in contact with along the way really paved the way for that. Paved the way for me to be able to see myself, right? A Black, queer, trans, Okie Muslim, right? To see that something like that can happen in the buckle of the Bible Belt, right? That's empowering, right? Like, I think about continuously like redefining our wins, and like, we win every day. We get to continue to show up and choose each other and radically love each other. And I don't get to engage in that if I'm not honoring each part of my identity. So there are some very isolating days. I'd be lying if I said that there weren't some days like this legislative session in Oklahoma where I was like, I don't know if I'll make it to June, right? But I get to fall into a district, House District 88, in a community of Oklahomans that set a new Oklahoma standard, a new standard for caring for one another every single day. And we get to have those tough conversations about, okay, what is carceral feminism, and how do we make sure that we aren't engaging in that, right, to be able to do some actually good work that doesn't leave our communities behind, because we're tired of that, right? And that happens because I was given a space continuously to lean into my identity and to understand myself, right? And I took that space. So it's good. It's got its ups, its downs, but I wouldn't be here without harnessing all those different parts of myself in a very full and a robust manner. So, yeah.
Thank you. Monica, when it comes to the intersection of race, class, gender, and reproductive justice, where are we since the fall of Roe, and what impact is it having on Black people across the reproductive?
Your lipstick is amazing. I just had to say that first. And we are coming up on, right, like the year since the Dobbs decision hit us. And definitely has me in deep reflection mode for all the reasons. But you know, I start this conversation all the time when people say, we don't have Roe anymore, what are we gonna do? And, you know, they always come at it from this, you know, perspective of like this huge loss, which it was. Sorry. But what's also real is that we knew this was coming too, right? And so I always wanna acknowledge that when I'm in these spaces, because Black women, women of color orgs, RJ people across this country, so many folks, we really, really tried to create opportunities for us to intercept this moment in so many ways. And unfortunately, that wasn't listened to all the time. We weren't trusted in that way. And so I can't have this conversation without acknowledging all the work that people have been doing for decades before this, and a time before this decision even became a thing to the major public, that this is where we were going. To have to acknowledge that. But secondly, you know, our communities are struggling, right? We are fighting abortion bans across the country in so many states. We're fighting one in Georgia still to this day. And I mean, it has been a crazy uphill battle. Like, they are literally trying to pick off state by state by state and to diminish and decrease and restrict access for us to be able to make our own decisions about our bodies and our ability to create our own futures. And that's just not okay. And we're seeing that being coupled with so many other things around our voting, around queer and trans liberation work. I mean, all of these things are so interconnected to each other. And it's a hard time for folks out there, right? Our organizations that were created to be advocacy organizations are now having to become organizations that provide direct service, that are creating opportunities for more mutual aid because our communities need care. And what we are committed to doing, regardless of what is happening politically, is to take care of our communities. And so that's what we're experiencing, right? We're seeing, just like, you know, from Florida to North Carolina to all these different decisions just coming down. It feels like daily sometimes, right? Where we're like knocking more time off, really pushing care out of the way for people. And then we're still dealing with the maternal health crisis. We're still dealing with the fact that we are not talking about what is happening with our bodies and sex education across this country in a comprehensive way. Like, all of these things are just coupling on top and just boiling on top of each other. But what I really try to focus on in these moments is that we do have an opportunity now that I'm excited about, right? We are really thinking about how we want to chart a path forward that is not centered in whiteness, but centered in what we know it needs to be centered in, which is our lives, right? And what we know is necessary for our communities. And that part has been really powerful, to see the collective power that we are building in this moment around these conversations and shifting the way that we're having these conversations around bodily autonomy is also really, really powerful. And to see how that conversation has become a thread across so many different, so many other intersections of our work has been really, really great to see. But it was Black women in 1994 that said we actually need to create this cultural intervention, as I like to call it, and really shift the way that we are talking about reproductive health and rights in this country, and really make it more expansive, make it more rooted in human rights, rooted in connecting intersectionality in the ways that we do. Like, that is what we did. And now we're able to see what it means to actually do that, not just in theory, but in practice. And that's kind of where we're landing right now. So it is hard. Our communities are being hit the worst. We know that it is us, it is our folks, it's people that look just like us that experience the most impact and harm whenever we reduce or remove access to our communities. But it's always Black women in particular, right? When we gather, I'm telling you, stuff changes, right? And so that's the thing that really keeps me going in these moments, because I've seen time after time after time that when we center us, right, then we're able to see the shifts happen that we need to.
All right. So, in 2014, Time magazine told us we were in the midst and experiencing a transgender tipping point. Since then, the right has declared war on transgender people, more specifically transgender children. We know it has never been an ideal time to be Black and living at the beautiful and radical intersection of queer, trans, and non-binary. But what happened between 2014 with Laverne Cox being on the cover of Time to now?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting that these two things are always linked, but everything I've learned is that those two things are actually decoupled. And there's always, what I mean by that is that the plan to put trans people and trans rights front and center as a part of a larger Christian nationalist ideological push happened before Laverne got on the cover, basically about a year before. I think that Laverne being on the cover accelerated the focus that they already were having, but we would have gotten here anyway. Didn't matter that Laverne was on the cover or not. And there's this constant conversation that, the visibility is what's leading to where we are now. No, a white nationalist ideology that's animated by an extreme reading of Christianity is why we are where we are. It has nothing to do with our visibility or not. And again, because the Christian nationalist movement are such powerful cultural listeners, I think they're better cultural listeners than we are. They had an understanding that the country, the next conversation after gay people was going to be trans people, and already were brainstorming and thinking about how they were going to capitalize on that for their own gains. So I think that we have to like disabuse ourselves of this idea that shrinking ourselves is going to save us. That not being ourselves is the way to go. Because the people who wish to do us harm wish that we don't exist. They don't care what size. They don't care if it's large or small. Just the fact that you exist is the issue. So that's the first thing. I always think that that's an important thing to do. And again, why are they focusing on trans kids? They're focusing on trans kids because they did a bunch of focus groups and research in 2018 which showed them to focus on trans kids because focusing on trans kids was the way to capitalize on kind of the soft transphobia that exists in most of society that doesn't find expression when you talk about adults but can find expression when you talk about kids. So again, like the where we are in this conversation is not an accident. And there's no causality in which we're the instigators. The toxic culture that we have in this country is why we are where we are. So then the culture then becomes, what is the antidote to that? Right? Not how to make people more comfortable with trans kids, not how to make people more comfortable with trans people, not how to not necessarily focus so much on Black trans people. You know, all of that conversation is actually trying to solve the origins of the problem that aren't the origins of the problem. So I think that we have to think expansively when we are thinking about the ways to overcome. And we have to always be expansive when we are thinking about why things are the way they are. And every single phenomenon that I am talking about is going to be made that much worse by artificial intelligence, by the ability to be able to create fake videos, by the ability to be able to create entire speeches that sound as if they were said by a person or who not. Creating, they could use everything in the manosphere and the Black manosphere to create a person who looks like they're making videos on YouTube and on TikTok, but is a totally fake person that was generated by an AI from someone who's a white nationalist and they're trying to appeal to Black men. So like we have to think about the where we are, and again the antidote of being expansive and not to focus on, and again to not see in this question, you know, to not see any of the things that are happening as separate. You can't separate the conversation about trans people without talking about the conversation about Black people. It's just impossible. You know, you can't separate the conversation about reproductive justice from a conversation about religion and how we are, you know, like these things aren't separate. They're actually all joined up. And so the last thing that I'll say is that I say this all the time, which is that like progressives talk intersectionally, but the right fights intersectionally. And what I mean by that is that they fight and they fundamentally understand how all of these things are working together, which is why they're fighting them all at the same time. You never hear them say, oh, this year we're gonna focus on like on rolling back reproductive justice, so we're not gonna make a push on voting rights this year. Or, oh, no, this year we're going to focus on trans people. So you know what? Focusing on, you know, race in schools, we're not going to do that this year. They fight all the battles at the same time. It's because they understand that all the battles are linked. So then the whole thing is that the people who want to try to build a different society have to then revolutionize the way that we think and we move in the way that things are, and that there are no trade-offs, and that there has to be a simultaneous push on multiple fronts at the same time if we want to build the world that we want to live in. If not, it's not going to happen. And so the push is to stop making trade-offs at a time and in a space and at a critical moment where the other side isn't making any of those trade-offs. And that's one of the reasons why they continue to be able to move forward and to keep us on defense. Because every year, for examples, foundations that fund our organizations will change every 2 years. Oh, well, we're not doing democracy this year, we're doing reproductive rights. And then 2 years later, we're not doing that, we're doing race. And meanwhile, the people that you are up against are all moving at the same time. So there has to be a revolution grounded in the vision of Black women, as we were just talking about, that Bonnie was just talking about, that we have to move on at the same time, where there cannot be these trade-offs. We're not going to win that way.
Okay. TK, in the words of one of my favorite ancestors, Octavia Butler, I am positively obsessed with the digital Black feminist work you do online through your IG page, The Darkest Hue. Tell us about your online digital feminist work and how you use digital media to teach and raise consciousness online through a Black feminist lens. And after this, we're going to go to audience questions.
So I created the Darkest Hue Instagram page in March 2020, I believe. So I had just been sent home from college because COVID was happening and quarantine was going to happen soon. So I had a lot of time to reflect when I was at home, and I was turning to online spaces to cope with my feelings of loneliness and dread and despair that I'm sure many of us were also experiencing during that time. So during my reflections, I reflected on how online I was, and I was very online, and all the discourse that I was seeing. And 2020 was also a very important year for activism, and it was a year where people were interested in being anti-racist and becoming more aware and being allies and fighting against racism. And while all that was happening, I noticed that it was a lot of Black women and non-men doing the organizing, doing the work, doing the pushing, doing the challenging the status quo, doing the imagining, doing the world and space building. But we were not in these mainstream discourses of who needs liberating and who needs protecting, who we should march for, who we should put our lives on the line for. And it had me thinking about my experiences with colorism. And I'm originally from Sierra Leone, but when I was around 5 years old, I moved to Washington State. And the elementary school I went to was very white. I was one of 3 Black people in the entire school, I think. And at Washington State and that school, the biggest monster, the elephant in the room, was racism, because little kids can be very overtly racist. And then when I moved to Philly, when I was 8, 9, I went to a predominantly Black school. And for a little bit, I was relieved because I thought this was going to be a turning point. Racism was a thing of the past. Everyone looks like me. There would be everything will be okay, and all the issues I used to deal with would be suddenly solved. And then I encountered a new monster, which was colorism and xenophobia. So before I even had the language to really understand what colorism was, before I had the knowledge about the history and all the different institutions that interact to produce unfavorable, disparate outcomes for dark-skinned people, I was experiencing colorism, and it was deeply hurtful. I internalized a lot of it, and as a little dark-skinned girl, I didn't know who to turn to. I didn't really think I can turn to my lighter-skinned mother. I didn't think I could turn to my father. It just felt like I was experiencing colorism in isolation. And I took it very personally. I thought there was something intrinsically wrong with myself. Otherwise, why were people treating me like this? And it wasn't just the overt displays of colorism. It was also the little things, the way I noticed adults treated lighter-skinned children better, especially lighter-skinned girls, the way I noticed they were more gentle and delicate with them, the way I noticed that they looked like they were more interested in what they had to say, and they were more willing to advocate for them and show up for them and support them. And so for a while, I felt like I had to be super amazing at school because I thought that would be my saving grace. I thought I could combat the invisibility by excelling in my academics, and I think that did work because I think I sometimes doubt if my teachers at school would have saw me otherwise. So those were some things I was reflecting on while in quarantine. And I noticed that there weren't a lot of digital spaces that really spoke about those issues. There weren't a lot of digital spaces that centered dark-skinned Black people who also experienced misogyny. And I noticed that with the colorism discourse that would go viral on the likes of the Shade Room and Rap Alert and those pages, the comment section would be a cesspool of just hate, and confusion and gaslighting and people calling dark-skinned Black women jealous and bitter and y'all need to heal, go to therapy, this, that, and the third. There was just no space to be brutally honest about how the world makes us feel. And I remember reading Toni Morrison's Bluest Eye, and it was such an eye-opening moment for me because I was like, she gets it. Toni Morrison understands, and she gets a lot of things because she's Toni Morrison. But the way she was able to encapsulate how the world makes little dark-skinned girls feel and how that manifests in how institutions treat little dark-skinned girls and the poverty and the sexual assault Black girls face and the lack of mental health access. It just really affirmed everything I was experiencing, and it made me feel a lot less crazy. I also noticed that the pages that did exist, that so-called centered dark-skinned Black women, it would just be images of Black women oiled up and the Black women people could find attractive. So the thin Black women, and a lot of the Black women were hypersexualized. It just felt like those pages were feeding into some of the harmful rhetoric and ideas and ideologies that make colorism so successful and like makes colorism thrive. So I just wanted to create a space where we could critically interrogate colorism and be honest, even if it makes other Black people look bad. Because something I found with my advocacy work is there's a lot of Black people who are obsessed with how talking about intra-racial issues makes other Black people look, because we like to pretend it's kumbaya and like white people don't see complexion and we're all oppressed the same, and that's simply not true. And through my advocacy work and through producing the content I've produced, I've been able to become more knowledgeable about issues that I wasn't super invested in the past because of the privileges I hold. For example, fat phobia. So I think by doing this work that highlights intra-group disparity, it's an opening to gain insight and become invested with other types of intra-group disparities, because it's not just colorism, right? There's a lot of them, and they intersect, and they all interact to produce sometimes very awful outcomes for the people that are most marginalized within Black people. So that's how I came to the work I'm doing right now with The Darkest Hue, and I'm just so excited about where it's going and where that work will take me, and I just want to keep complicating these very surface level mainstream conversations we have about racism, where we think racism is just white people versus black people or white people versus everyone else. I want people to think I just want people to start being curious about how people within the same race can experience oppression very differently. And in the struggle for liberation, we want to make sure no one is left behind. So the reason why so many of the first black people are like biracial or like light-skinned is because when we're fighting for access, we're still not tackling these intragroup issues. So when you see the representation that is being produced, it's very colorist, it's very able-bodied, it's transphobic, it's very fat-phobic, and I don't think black people can be liberated in groups. So like first it's light-skinned people, and then it's thin people. I think black people should all be liberated together, and that liberation will happen when we actually complicate our understanding of oppression as not something that happens between groups, but also happens internally.
Okay. We are done. So I would like to thank the panelists for this beautiful, rich conversation. Obviously, all of these amazing people can be found on the internet, and let's do some deep dive. And thank you so very much for helping shape this conversation. So many good things were said, and I know that will help further shape our Black feminist consciousness here. Thank you so very much, everyone.
Thank you to our incredible plenary speakers, Amara Jones, Mari Turner, T.K. Sacco, and Monica Ray Simpson, and our moderator, Lutzi Segu. Be sure to check the Hoover app for updates on shuttle times for the North Star Gala and Homecoming Dance at the American Visionary Art Museum. Use the Columbia Way exit located in the hotel lobby behind the bell stand. The Homecoming Dance is open to all get-free attendees. Safety reminder to remove your badges while traveling outside of the hotel. You will show your app to enter tonight's events.
Spinning all around, feel the rhythm, chant the rhyme, come on along and have a real good time. Like the days of stomping at the Savoy, now we're free, oh what a joy. Just come on down to 54, find a spot out on the floor.
Admission to the North Star Gala is for participation only. Whoever registered. Ticket holders